welcome everyone. My name is Janet and I'm working through the King James's Bible. Today I am in the book of Genesis and working through chapters 29 to 32 today. Now I posted all the links under this video because I am a beginner and all the concrete information is there for you. I'm just going to give a quick overview of each chapter as I've read it and what I've taken from it. So here we go, starting with chapter 29. So we start with Jacob. We're on his journey. He's off towards the east and he comes across and he arrives at the destination that he needs to get to because he sees this well and it has a rock over it, and he sees all these herdsmen bringing their flocks up to this well, which is what they do. They bring them all around, and when they're all there they take the rock off and water the herd. So he approaches this well and he says to the herdsmen, "Where are you from?" And they say Haran, which is where he's headed. And he says, "Great, do you know Laban?" And they say, "Yeah, we do know Laban." And they said, "Is he well?" And they say, and he asks, is he well? And they say, "Yeah, he is." And by the way, they see the daughter coming up. They said, "This is Rachel, his daughter, and she's a shepherd bringing a flock of sheep up to the well to be watered." So as a kind gesture, Jacob decides he's going to pull off the rock, which he does, and helps them water their flock. So as Rachel approaches, he says to her, "Hey," and lets her know. He says, "I am the son of Rebecca. Rebecca is your father's sister." And she's thrilled, and he kisses her, they embrace, and she runs to Laban and tells him, "Look, hi, father, my nephew's here," and they're all excited, and Laban invites him in, he embraces him, and he's like, "Yay, you're my flesh and blood, come on in." And Jacob stays with him for a month, and he's working the land, he's helping him, doing all this labour. And then Laban says, "I know you're my family member, but you don't have to work for free. What can I, how can I repay you?" And Jacob says, "Oh, you don't need to repay me with anything specific." He says, "Apart from Rachel, I would like to take Rachel as my wife, and I'll work for you for 7 years if you can give me Rachel." They agree to that, so he works for him for 7 years, and then after the 7 years, he comes to him to marry Rachel. Now, just to put as well, just to say that Laban has 2 daughters. He has Leah, who is the eldest, and Rachel, who is the youngest. Now, on the evening, because he puts on this feast for this celebration of connection, he puts on this feast, and on the evening he actually puts in Leah into the tent with Jacob, not Rachel. Unbeknown to Jacob, he sleeps with Leah, thinking that she's Rachel, and then on the morning realizes what is going on, goes straight to Laban and says, "Hey, what's going on? Leah was in my room, and you promised me Rachel. Rachel was the one I promised." He said, "Yeah." Laban says, "But tradition is basically that the eldest is married first before the youngest. That's just how it is. So I tell you what, in another 7 years, if you work for us, you can have Rachel as well." So he agrees to this. Jacob agrees to it, and as he marries Leah, she is given a handmaid called Zilpah, and they get married, and on he goes, and then he works another 7 years and gets Rachel, and she also gets a maid, and she is called Bilhah. So the plot thickens. Now, as he has 2 wives, he loves Rachel. He doesn't really love Leah. And this is quite sad, and God sees this. And so what he decides to do is he allows Leah to have children, and he prevents Rachel from being able to give birth. She ends up being barren. So Leah then conceives a son, and she calls him Reuben. And she feels, surely now Jacob will love me now that I have given him a son. And then she has another son, and she names that son Seaman. And she praises the Lord again and says, I've been given another son, and it's going to bring her closer to Jacob. And she has a 3rd son, and this son is called Levi. And she's just like, wow, 3 sons, this is amazing. My husband is going to so love me now. And then she has a 4th son, and this one is called Judah, and she praises the Lord only. And this ends her bearing any more children. And that takes us to the end of chapter 29. So we now move on to chapter 30. And in chapter 30, Rachel starts envying her sister Leah because she's giving birth to all these 4 children and she has none. And so she goes to Jacob, please, come on, I need to bear children, I'm going to die. And he says, look, gets angry. I am not the one who decides who is able to give birth. That's the Lord. The Lord decides that. So then Rachel asks Jacob to sleep with her handmaid. Like, if I can't give you children, then sleep with my handmaid Bilhah, and she will give you children. So she's forcing her will against that of God's. She wants children, and so she's going to whatever means possible. Now, if you think back to previous chapters, this is a very similar situation that happened with Abraham and Sarah. You know, she couldn't initially give birth, and she forced her husband to then sleep with her servant, and you know the story if you've read it from there. So here we are again, history kind of repeating itself. So Bilhah ends up, she's given as a wife to Jacob through Rachel, and he sleeps with her, and Bilhah gives Jacob a son. And Rachel says to God, God has judged me and heard me and given me a son. He will be named Dan. So we have a son called Dan now. And Bilhah conceives again a second son. And Rachel's delighted and feels like she's overthrowing her sister. You know, she's getting up there with the children, and she calls this child Naphtali, I think. Check out the name yourself and read it, because I'm not an expert in reading these names. It's Naphtali. There we go. So when Leah sees this, you know, that now her sister's having children through hers, she has been stopped bearing, and she gets Jacob then to marry, well, to take in the wife of her servant, Zilpah. So Zilpah now comes in. We've got 4 women now giving children. Well, 3 women, sorry, giving children for Jacob. So he sleeps then with Leah's handmaid, and she bears a child, and she says, I'm going to call this child Gad. Then Zilpah conceives another son. So the handmaid gives another son. We've got 2 sons now. And Leah is absolutely delighted, and she says, I'm blessed, and calls him Asher. So we have another 2 children. So both handmaids now have given 2 children. Now Reuben, who is the first son of Jacob, goes into a field of wheat, and he finds these man rakes and takes them to his mum, Leah. And Rachel says, I want those man rakes. And she says, look, you've taken my husband, now you want to take my son's hand rake? No, she said, no. She said, if I give you these, I want to sleep with Jacob for a night. So it's like prostitution, this, in a way. Then Rachel says, okay, you can sleep with Jacob. So then Jacob sleeps with Leah for this night. For the handrakes, the mandrakes. What is he doing? You know, what is the world coming to here? Leah goes to Jacob, telling him that she has to sleep with him for these handrakes. So he sleeps with her, and then God hearkened to Leah and conceives a 5th son. So Leah, in sleeping with Jacob this night, has another son. So now 5. And she calls the 5th son Issachar. And she says, this is because I gave you my handmaid to bear. So it's all really in God's eyes about expanding, isn't it? It's like ploughing the land. He's always very happy and fruitful for that. And then if you're conceiving and multiplying, it's like you're spreading the seed, which is creating strength. And so then Leah, again, not only does she have 5 children, she has a 6th child, and this one she calls Zebulun, and said, now I've given my husband 6th son, he will dwell with me. So she's sort of like, he's finally going to stay with me because I've given them all sons. And then she bears a daughter and she names her Dinah. But there's no real sort of woohoo when this daughter's born, it's just more about the sons. But anyway, she has a daughter as well amongst all of these boys. So God remembers Rachel as obviously Leah's just growing in expansion. It's like sort of turning to the ones who's not so much now, and opens her womb and allows her finally to have children. So she then conceives a son and calls him Joseph. And Jacob asks now Laban to send him away with his wives, his children, as he served him well. This he has, and he's got such an expanding family now. I think he's sort of outgrowing the area. He thinks it's time to lead. And Laban says, "The Lord blessed me for having you here," because he acknowledges that Jacob being there has allowed his land, his basically flocks to get bigger, and is like, things are getting bigger. He's getting more prosperous. He's getting more wealthy. And he says, "I want to repay you for all that you've done." He says, "So how can I repay you?" And Jacob says, "Look, what will happen is, I don't need you to repay me. I'm going to go out, I'm going to work another 6 years with your flocks, and I want to take any that are speckled, and any brown ones, and any speckled goats, they'll be mine. And if you see me taking any that are not that, I've stolen them." So that's kind of what he sets out to do. He's going to go out. But what Laban does is he sends his men out straight away, and he gets rid of all of the ones that are speckled, the brown ones, and all of this, takes them away for 3 days. He gets his men out there, take them away so that they're not there when Jacob goes out after these 3 days. He then takes on the herds. But what he does is he gets some rods with rods of green poplar, of hazel and chestnut trees. And he uses these to create streaks onto the cattle that he wants. And he goes for the ones that are stronger. So he marks the strongest, not the weakest. He leaves the weakest for Laban. And he starts building up his wealth. And he's starting to build a really strong flock and leaving Laban with the weaker ones. And that ends our chapter 30. Now we move on to chapter 31, our final chapter in today's video. So we get to now see Laban's son coming to him and telling him what's going on with Jacob's flock. They think there's some kind of trickery going on, and this obviously changes the way Laban now sees Jacob. He doesn't favour him as much. And Jacob realises this, something's changed. Then in one night's sleep during this time, God comes to Jacob and he says, it's time for you now to go back to the land in which you came. So he wakes and tells his wives, he takes them somewhere and he says, "Look, your father, I worked for you for 7 years and I was meant to get Rachel and I ended up with Leah," and just tells them all the things, the mishaps that have gone on, and that 10 times the father has changed things on him, and he got this message from God and it's time for him to leave. And they look at their life and they think, yeah, look what has happened. Our father's just been selling us off like this and changing things. We're going to go with you. So they decide to go with him. And just as they're leaving, Rachel goes back and she takes 2 idols belonging to her father Laban. She takes them unbeknownst to Jacob, and off they flee. It takes 3 days. In 3 days' time, Laban finds out about this, that they've just fled with all the stock and his, sons and daughters, and he is so angry. He starts pursuit on towards Jacob. And as he's journeying on, he has a sleep, and this is when the Lord comes to Laban and says, "Look, this journey that you're on, don't go there, don't do this with Jacob." So he's had a warning. So he hot pursuit towards Jacob, and he meets up with him, and this is where he says to him, "What on earth are you doing? You didn't give me chance to say goodbye to my sons and daughters. I could have given you joy and songs and given you a goodbye." And Jacob says, "Well, I thought you were going to with force stop me taking my wives and what is rightfully mine." And he says, "You've taken 2 of my idols. I know you have." And he starts searching the tents, and Jacob's like, we have not taken anything, because he doesn't know about this. But when, because Rachel is on her period, that basically he doesn't go into her tent. It's like, you don't do that when they're in that cycle. That's part of their tradition. So luckily, he does not go into the tent. He doesn't find these idols. So Laban says we need to make a covenant between God and us. So they decide to do this, and what Jacob does is he gets a rock again, a pillar, and they start making this heap. Gets all the men together, they make this heap, and they call the heap Gilead. And they put this heap there, and this is sort of like the mark to saying, we will not pass, you will not come towards us, and we will not go towards you. I will cause you no harm. Separate ways, off we go. That's kind of where it's left. So they do the usual ritual where they have this breaking of bread, like kind of have a meal on the night that celebrate this oath. They make the oath in the morning, and then that's it, time to part ways. And he kisses his sons and daughters, and off they go. Jacob goes his way, Laban goes his, and that is the end of our chapter 31. So yeah, looking through these 3 stories so far, we see a lot of kind of, well, just not doing as you say, not following your word, changing things up. And maybe this is because of what Jacob has done. It's like maybe life lessons, because he's been pretty much this way, and now he's the one being tricked a lot. But he's been there, like God's been with him throughout it all, and obviously keeping him on his path. He's worked hard. He's worked 7 years for Leah. He's worked 7 years for Rachel. They've multiplied, certainly multiplied with all of the children that each are having. But you can see that as well, that envy and the sort of competition between the 2 sisters, because there's one guy, and it's just like that dynamic of 3 is not a good. They always think 2 is good, but 3 is not. It causes this kind of like battle. And just as well as you see how God likes people who are looking after the land and multiplying, he seems to have that going throughout all of these chapters so far, from the beginning to now. It seems that is something that he is very wants to spread the seed, I guess. So yeah, it's an interesting journey we are on so far, and just how things are progressing. So we will carry on tomorrow with our next chapters, and yeah, I hope you got something out of today's video. So thank you for watching, and yeah, we'll come back again tomorrow for our next chapters within the book of Genesis. See you then. Take care, everyone. Bye.